Okay, we are ready. You can start it.
Thank you, Mark. It looks like we got about 11 people. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us as we complete our second day of our three-day Charrette series. Thank you again for all of those that are joining us again. And I also like to acknowledge the planning commissioners. Some of the planning commissioners are present. And we appreciate you guys joining us. Kaiser?
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Ron. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second day of the Charrette. My name is Kaiser Rangwala. I'm with principal with Rangwala Associates, and my team is facilitating the update to the downtown Baldwin Park specific plan. I see a few new names, so if you are just joining us, we will bring you up to speed and welcome. It's not too late, and we hope you catch up fast and you enjoy the presentation and provide us feedback. Just quickly walk over the process. The process is essentially 6 steps. We've concluded the discovery work. We're currently in the visioning stage, where we consult with the community, and the purpose of the 3-day is to present the outcome of the discovery, to establish a baseline, and to begin to evaluate various options that are available to the community as it encourages preservation, renewal, and reinvestment in its downtown area. And then once you get past the charrette, we will begin drafting the specific plan and the code that goes with the specific plan, and the environmental documentation. Hope to have the plan ready for adoption, for consideration or adoption in about roughly 8 months, 7 to 8 months in the month of August. We are in day 2 of the charrette, and we started yesterday with a noon presentation from Michael Wright. He presented the market assessment and development strategy for downtown Baldwin Park. That presentation in its entirety is available online. So if you missed that presentation, you can watch it at your leisure. There are a lot of interesting information, a very comprehensive overview of downtown Baldwin Park, including some development strategies that are worthy of consideration. And then in the evening, we started the discussion. I'll quickly summarize some of that and encourage my team members to do the same, and then we'll catch up from that. The process is we want to work in incremental but iterative fashion. So we present you concepts, you provide us feedback, and based on that feedback, we make refinements and explore different alternatives, come back to you, present it. So we are in day 2 of that presentation. Based on your feedback today, we'll make the refinements, and our goal is to have a master plan ready. Earlier this afternoon, Vinayak Bane from Moon & Poluzoid made a presentation on elements of successful downtown. Again, that presentation is available in its entirety on the city's website and the project website, I should say, as well as the Facebook project page for the on Facebook. Then tomorrow at noon, we have Tim Ernie from Kettleson. He will talk about mobility trends and opportunities. So please attend that as well. And just a note, tomorrow we start not at 6 p.m., but at 4:30 p.m. So please take a note of the start time for tomorrow. So what you see in the darker purple is your existing, the buildings that are within, buildings and lots that are within the existing specific plan. And what you see in the lighter purple are expanded areas of the specific plan. This is the question that we received yesterday. Why don't we expand certain areas? And this, I want to hone in on this graphic and show precisely why we're expanding. We want to take opportunities that present themselves at the station and also protect the existing neighborhood. Involving some of the frontage parcels along the station helps us do that. In addition, there are additional opportunities that have presented themselves as catalytic sites since the last specific plan. They've been added to expand the boundaries. So the new boundaries are everything that is dark purple and the light purple areas. This is a 3D rendering that illustrates a couple of important concepts, and I want to quickly highlight 2 or 3. The downtown Baldwin Park is over 142 years old, the entire city of Baldwin Park. And the downtown really kicked off when you had the red line coming in along Ramona, and you had a grid system that provided access. Over the years, that existing grid system, the street grid system, has been eroded by consolidation of certain blocks. And you can see that as you look at the grid system around downtown Baldwin Park, when it comes into the downtown area, you see larger chunks of land. In most downtowns, you see the opposite. When you come to the downtown, you see a much more granular, much more finer network of street. The challenges as we look at making this area more friendly, more walkable, because one of the things we heard from the interviews we conducted is it's difficult to get from one destination to another. And by the way, you have some really good assets and really good destinations in the downtown. The question is, how do you link, how do you make the journey between these destinations also as wonderful as the destinations itself? We're looking and we're exploring, we started exploring, how do you weave a network of streets, weave together the streets that are there and create a finer granular street network. But then also, besides the linkages and reweaving the streets, the opportunity that the streets present to reimagine them, not just as places to move traffic, but to reimagine them as multimodal, as perhaps even linear open spaces that can stitch together your existing open spaces and a variety of new open spaces. So a variety of street types that begin to stitch together your variety of existing and proposed open spaces. Now, another thing this super block does is you see the buildings and you see large areas of gray. Those gray areas are essentially parking lots. And in the downtown area, you have 776 parking spaces, plus about 511 in the parking garage at the station. Average occupancy of parking in the downtown is about 56%, and that is roughly to say that half of the parking spaces are not occupied. And there is a surplus of 325 spaces. That's a great opportunity to attract investment and to leverage enhancing the public realm, both in terms of streets and open spaces. So with that introduction, I want to introduce Tim Oney from Kittleson, who's going to walk you through some of the mobility concepts and parking strategy concepts that we have been discussing, and then he will introduce the next speaker following his talk.
Great, thank you, Kaiser. Just wanted to do a quick sound check to make sure everything sounds okay. We good?
Yep.
We are good, excellent. So as Kaiser mentioned, Baldwin Park in particular has some really unique transportation options and some great opportunities that we can take advantage of. So as an example, it's relatively flat, and outside the downtown area, it has a pretty good grid system. And most importantly, there's a lot of transit options. And we really need to take advantage of this, especially with respect to the transit infrastructure and the commitments that have been made by multiple agencies, including the city. So one of the key elements of this is the Metrolink station, which is shown in light blue on this figure. One of the key things and one of the unique things about Buena Park is that this is the only major Metrolink station that's located in a downtown area that has transit conducive land uses next to it. Most of the other Metrolink stations are located in more industrial areas or are surrounded by fields of parking. So this is just a great opportunity to use Metrolink as a catalyst for new development, new opportunities, and new transportation options. So in addition, this Metrolink also serves an important role in the city in that it provides commute service from residents of Baldwin Park to go to downtown LA to the west, or to go to Ontario and Riverside to the east. However, we may have the opportunity to establish Baldwin Park more as a destination. So people are actually traveling here from downtown LA or from Riverside, Ontario to spend the day. So that's one of the things we've been looking at as part of the land use program, and you'll probably hear a little bit more from Vinayak later about how we can start to energize the land uses surrounding the Metrolink station and take advantage of this. So what we want to do is look at how can we maximize the effectiveness of the transit infrastructure and of the city's commitments to transportation and transit. So we looked at the existing systems, and these are shown here on the maps as well. So we have not only the Metrolink station, which is in light blue, we have Foothill Transit lines. There's 4 of them that serve the downtown area. And there's also the Baldwin Park shuttle, the pumpkin and the teal routes, which travel around the city. And in looking at these, there's some opportunities we have to actually enhance and further invigorate the transit opportunities within the city. So some of the ideas that we've had that we're going to be exploring as part of this plan is to work with Foothill Transit to shift one of the bus lines, the number 178 line, which operates on Baldwin Park Boulevard, which is on the far west end of the study area, to operate on Main Avenue. And this would reduce some duplicity of service, because right now there's 2 lines that operate on Baldwin Park, but also provide opportunities to have a better connection to the current shuttle and to serve one of the opportunity sites that we're looking at. We also want to look at opportunities to better overlap the shuttle system with Foothill Transit stops, so there's more seamless connection between transit modes. Look to see if there's opportunities to provide better connection between the Foothill Transit stops at Ramona and Bogart to the Metrolink station. Right now, it's kind of an unattractive walk. There's some missing crosswalks. So to facilitate that connection, once again, should help improve that circulation access. We also are going to look at opportunities to integrate new transit stops into new development. So as development comes in and are replacing that's out there today, can they start to fold in some transit supportive elements into their design, such as, one thing we always hear from transit operators is they need restrooms for their bus drivers. So maybe there's opportunities to provide those kind of services to improve and enhance the overall transit. We also want to look at ways to enhance wayfinding and to provide more amenities at stops. Most of the stops right now have a trash can and a shelter. There's no wayfinding, so there's no good mapping that shows where destinations are or where the nearest transit stop is for another line. Or providing things besides just shade, but maybe there are some other amenities that can be provided nearby, such as maps, such as charging stations for your phone and the like. And another thing that we're looking at is the bus bays that are currently provided along Ramona. So this gives opportunities for the buses to pull out of traffic, which is great for traffic flow. However, it can be difficult for buses to get back into the traffic flow when they're done picking up and dropping off passengers. So one of the things that several transit operators are looking at now are actually having the buses stop more in line with the travel lanes or within the parking lane to help facilitate those access and connections. So those are some of the transit mobility improvements that we're looking at as part of this plan. So Kaiser, if you have the next one. So another thing and another opportunity to improve access is mobility hubs. And this is a relatively new term for kind of an older school way of doing things. But really, mobility hubs look to improve the connection between the modes and travel and to really facilitate the connection between user groups. So when we talk about mobility hubs, what we're looking at is a combination of various elements, such as wayfinding, bike share or scooter stations, kiosks and information for transit lines, pickup and drop off areas, spaces for electric vehicle charging, Wi-Fi hotspots, even locations to put mobile retail or food trucks. So really, these are hubs that people can use when they're traveling between modes, and really it kind of actually becomes a little active community area. So there's 3 locations right now that would be great to put in mobility hubs. And this is at the Metrolink station, near City Hall, and for Morgan Park and the community center. In addition, as we continue to look at expansion of the land use program throughout the area, there's other opportunities that could arise too, such as at the Value Plus Marketplace and the Main Avenue Marketplace. So as these areas develop, there could be opportunities to input mobility hubs there as well to kind of continue to build that network across the city. So one thing though that we often forget is that streets aren't just for cars, right? Streets are for people. And we need to make sure that we're planning for and building roadways that are safe and convenient for everybody. And that's for young and old, for people riding a bike or on foot, for people who are, strong bike commuters and people who are out there riding for the first time, people who are in cars, people who are doing deliveries, and people who are getting on a bus. And the key with this is we want to get people out of their cars and to walk or to take transit or to take bikes as much as possible, because this really improves public health, air quality. It can help ease congestion and also reduces greenhouse emissions, which are all really good goals for us to have. So in 2008, the California state legislature passed what was called the Complete Streets Act, which actually requires cities and counties to include complete street policies as part of their planning documents to make sure that roadways are designed to accommodate all user groups. So not only is it a good thing to do, we're actually kind of required to do that right now as well. But when we're talking about complete streets, we have to understand that not every street has to be complete. We don't have to put bike lanes on every single street. We don't have to have every street be designed to accommodate heavy trucks. What it means, though, is that we should strive to minimize barriers to people using these modes and also reduce obstacles. In other words, make it so everybody has equal access to the roads and then provide facilities as needed to accommodate the key demand points. So this is going to be especially important when we're considering the first and last mile connections to the Metrolink station and the other transit. And we really want to make the downtown feel accessible and that you don't have to have a car in order to drive around. But we also understand that people will have cars. And so for that, we want to make sure we have a good parking management plan in place. So when we talk about parking and parking management, what we're saying is that we want to account for vehicles, but we want to make sure that we're doing it smartly. So we want to account for the vehicles, we want to account for their demand, we want to minimize ways to reduce we want to look at ways to minimize excessive parking. As Kaiser mentioned earlier, there's a lot of parking that's currently available throughout the downtown area, and that parking takes up a lot of room. And this is especially important because for a lot of these spaces, cars are just parked there all day long. They're not moving. So that space can't be used for anything else throughout the day. So looking throughout the downtown, we provided this information earlier. There are several lots that are historically less than 50% occupied on a normal day. And there's a lot of other things we can do with that space. We can put in new buildings, we can put in parks, we can put in transit hubs like we talked about, and a lot of other things. But honestly, parking is always a big topic in these conversations. Half the people think we're not providing enough, and half people think we're providing too much parking. So it's really difficult to kind of strive that middle ground. But one way of doing that is to really look at parking management strategies, especially associated with the transit ordinance development that we're talking about. So some of the things that we're looking at is developing a goal to increase the efficiency of the parking facilities, to improve the utilization, and to minimize the total amount of parking area. And in order to do that, we're going to look at things such as providing convenient on-street parking adjacent to new commercial uses. So new commercial buildings have parking directly in front. Providing security and access control if we're looking at maybe having people be allowed to park overnight. Let's say their residential building doesn't have enough parking and they want to be able to park on street or in a lot, make sure that's safe and secure. Look at doing a valet system to accommodate demand for large-scale events. When we have the concerts on the street, there's a lot of people downtown. Let's find ways to do maybe valet parking to spread them out. Encourage employees to park remotely. There are some lots that are further away from downtown. Employees can park there, walk in. That provides more safe and convenient parking for visitors. Look at establishing parking in lieu fees, maybe a parking app that will help show where parking is available, especially at the Metrolink station and the parking garage at City Hall. And coordinate with Metrolink to see if we can do something with the parking when it's not being used, right? So on weekends, Metrolink ridership is really low. What can we do with that space? Overnight, there's really nobody parked there. What can we do with those spaces, right? Once again, to improve the efficiency and to maximize utilization. And then finally, look to provide shuttles, right? So you already have the city shuttle. Maybe that can be used too as a parking shuttle, that people could park more remotely and conveniently take the shuttle to their key destinations. So that's with respect to public parking, but we also want to look at parking management strategies for private parking. And when we talk about private parking, primarily this is parking that's being developed as part of new buildings that are coming in. And we want to make sure that the new projects that are coming in are right sizing their parking, because honestly, parking is very expensive to build, especially if you're building it underground. And we don't want to have developers burdened with a high amount of parking that may not be used and can really add to the cost of their product. So there could be opportunities to allow developments to meet their parking requirements at off-site locations. to allow for sharing of spaces. So typically parking codes say that if you're a residential, you have to provide X number of spaces for your units and then Y number of spaces for any commercial space. But sometimes those can be combined because the parking demand for residential tends to be overnight versus during the day for commercial. So maybe we can change the codes a little bit. We can look at parking easements or use agreements between the city and private developers, once again, to maximize that parking efficiency, or establishing in lieu fees so that the developers could kind of purchase excess spaces from the city and use that to accommodate their requirements. We also want to look at unbundling parking demand. And that means if you're moving into a new building, your parking space isn't guaranteed, but you have to purchase it just like you would purchase your space, your unit. And that, therefore, people don't want to have a car. They don't have to pay extra for a parking space they're not going to use. We also want to make sure that people are accounting for pickup and drop off and deliveries either on the curb or inside the parking garage. So that will help improve the ability for car share or Ubers and Lyfts to access the properties. And we also want to have electric vehicle parking included as part of these developments. So these are all kind of private parking strategies we're going to be exploring as part of this program to see how, once again, how we can maximize the efficiency of parking and minimize wasteful parking. So with that, I will turn it over to Vinayak to talk a little bit more about the public realm and the street network.
Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
And can you see my mouse moving on the screen?
We can't see the mouse.
Can't see that.
Okay, don't worry about it. Just wanted to know. Okay, so just to pick up from Tim's points, there is, one of the most important assets that you have, just to repeat a little bit on what I was saying yesterday, are your streets. And as Tim alluded to, streets are not for, as Tim not alluded, he actually said it very explicitly, the streets are not for cars, they're really for people, they are extended parks. And I keep saying this again and again, it's the most beautiful thing I've heard about streets, changes your perception of what streets can be. So what this diagram basically shows you is before we get into all the big and small moves that we shared with you yesterday and we're going to share with you today, the bigger strategy is to figure out how to create an integrated network of streets. And one of the major observations we made in studying your downtown is there is a tendency to combine blocks and make sort of mega blocks. This is a tendency we've seen in many cities. Over time, walkable sized blocks get coalesced into much larger swaths that are 1,000 feet long. And this is a recipe for two debacles. One is traffic congestion, because if you have an accident on one side of a mega block, traffic circulation becomes very difficult around. And as a pedestrian, you don't get easy access from one side to the other. So what this diagram basically shows you is in orange with the dark lines are showing all the existing streets, which simply need to be leveraged and converted from conduits for cars to extended parks with verdant greens. Many of you, those of you that were here during the afternoon presentation, we talked about how these streets could be made verdant, how beautiful they could become. So there is a clear idea on how to make these streets not just places for pedestrians, not just places for cars, but places that allow the coexistence of this to happen and become the scaffold around which private development can take place. The second idea that you see in this diagram is the idea that the red dotted lines show the new streets that we are trying to put in, particularly to break the large mega blocks that you begin to see converted now into smaller walkable blocks with the insertion of open spaces and so on. So the idea is to introduce new streets, a few paseos or walks here and there, as you see near the train station, and you now get an integrated network that becomes the public realm, which will be designed by a landscape architect very carefully as individual components. So fundamentally, you have now the open space armature around which a number of moves can take place within your downtown. And this was the first drawing we generated, because this is where the concept really begins. What is practical about this idea is that these are all public improvement strategies. Most of your streets, if not all of your streets and all of your parks, are largely owned by the city. Certainly your streets are owned by the city. So if you want to transform a street, you don't need to negotiate with a private developer. You can actually invest money and transform them right away. This is why the making of the public realm becomes the scaffold for the transformation of the downtown. Next. Now, what we did next is we, based on this scaffold of public realm, streets and parks, we then put in yellow all of the potential areas where development might take place in the very long future. Now, please, please understand, and I will emphasize this, again and again, even tomorrow. Simply showing yellow does not mean this is going to happen over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or even will ever happen. It is just a study that says everything you see in brown are either buildings that are existing in downtown, like your city hall, or in the pipeline, like the project to the west of the lozenge-shaped space next to City Hall. That's a project in the pipeline. So all of the projects that are under the entitlement, in the entitlement process or otherwise, have been shown in brown. And then we're saying the yellow parcels were given to us as an initial series of catalytic projects by the city, to which we've added a few of our own in saying that these are sites that could take change for the better, that could take density in some of the forms that I talked about today afternoon, and could really talk about bringing in new development in a form that is both responsible to the context, transitional, as I talked about today, and create the makings of a downtown that is quite the antithesis of what you have, in the sense that you will not have buildings that are set back with parking lots in front of it, but buildings that actually make street faces. So I just want to emphasize this again. The yellow by no means means that we are erasing any buildings tomorrow or suggesting that they be demolished or anything of that nature. They are just pointers of catalytic sites identified by the city and a few by us that are potential places where bringing in private development would actually mean a lot for placemaking for your downtown in the social and economic sense. Next. And based on all this study over the last 2 days, we have generated this drawing, which is a first blush at a hypothetical, I emphasize that word with a capital H, a hypothetical scenario that is sort of a fictitious rendition of what might be a picture, just to make it more communicative to you, of an illustration of what a build out of your downtown might look like, if at all it can happen this way. This may happen in 20 years, it may happen in 50 years, it may never happen this way, but it gives you a blueprint that you can now guide depending on the incremental steps you want to take, depending on market conditions, etc. So I want to explain this in distinct steps because there's a lot to digest in this drawing. Overall, there are two comments I'd like to make. The first one is the buildings you see in light brown are the existing buildings or the buildings that are in the entitlement pipeline. The buildings that are shown in dark brown are the new development projects that we are talking about that become either new infill or new developments in the form of various densities of housing or mixed use projects that may come in. This is not a drawing about uses. The uses can be wherever we want them to be, however we want them to be. We should discuss that today. This is really a drawing about location of development, private versus public, how it relates to the public realm, and what the form, scale, and grain of this housing and these buildings wants to be. So there are a number of important strategies that I will take you through, and since I cannot point, maybe Kaiser, maybe you can point as I narrate that, and they can see your mouse, I think. Can we just test that if they can see your mouse?
Okay, I can.
If it's possible, I think that would help enormously.
Let's give it a try. I can't see my mouse.
Okay, well, we don't have to worry about it. I'll describe to the best of my ability. So I'd like to begin with the station area. So these are the different moves that begin the transformation of your downtown. The first is the station. You can see that we are showing an orange line. There are actually two lines because we do know that there's a possibility of there being two tracks in the future there. So we have accommodated that. And you can see the makings of a small yellow plaza with a little rectangle that is sort of showing the station. The reason we sort of inserted this plaza is because when you get down at a station, it is the first impression you make to a person who's entering your city. So getting down in a parking lot is very different than getting down in a designed open space. So our idea is we take Downing, which is a street that is currently set back further south from the parking lot that is there, and we bring it closer to the train tracks, because that parking could go away, and our parking studies prove that there's enough surplus parking available in the parking structure next to City Hall that parking could be absorbed in the parking structure. If that is the case, we think it's a very good move to take the street Downing southeast of the train tracks, push it towards the train tracks, and absorb the land and give it back to the blocks of the neighborhood. And this has two advantages. The parking lot, which is about 90 feet deep right now, can take not very good development. 90 feet deep is 80 to 90 feet deep is not a parcel that can take any substantial housing. Parking becomes very difficult. The housing is not very nice. Even if you were to build any kind of housing, it wouldn't be very nice to have housing that close to the Metrolink anyway. The Metrolink is a pretty noisy train. So why would you do that? Why? By putting a street next to the train tracks and by greening it, you're creating a buffer, and you now have the potential for taking the single family fabric, which you can see in those tiny brown buildings from the south, and bookending each block with the kind of buildings I showed in the afternoon, 3-story, 4-story, 4.5-story, that become robust housing right next to the train station that people can actually live to make it true TOD. That's idea number one. Idea number two is based on the reality that we may or may not get an on-grade crossing from the train station. In an ideal world, what would be wonderful is you get down on the plaza, you cross the tracks, directly, and you walk through that paseo, which we are showing next to the parking garage, and come straight to Ramona. If that happens, great. If it does not happen, we now have an alternative. Downing, which we have pushed towards the train station, has been made into a beautiful street. So a person could get down, walked on Downing, make a left or a right, and walk all the way towards Ramona, past City Hall and the enhanced version of City Hall, or on the other side, past the art piece that you see there, the tiny little piece on the east. Either way, he or she reaches Ramona through a very pleasant walk. So the first big move of this downtown plan is you leverage the presence of the station, you surround it by new housing, make a new face to the station, you acknowledge the presence of a station through a new plaza, and you create a positive linkage through a beautifully landscaped streetscape that the walk from the station into the heart of your downtown becomes clear, cogent, and pleasant. So that's move one. Move number two is actually enhancing the space in front of your City Hall. Your City Hall is one of the most important buildings of your downtown. There is already new development coming. I think we jumped up. There is already new development coming on the west side and the north side of City Hall. These are two buildings that are already in the pipeline. Because we know they're coming, it makes perfect sense to take the space in front of City Hall and think of it as a new kind of a park or plaza. I mean, think of this as a space, where you could have your Christmas gathering or some important event, civic event that from time to time brings the community together into a unique place that is identifiable and high quality. The other advantage of enhancing the space in front of City Hall is that the walk along Pacific due north into Ramona now becomes a beautiful walk because you go by a beautiful plaza. It's a verdant walk. It's an accent into the walk, which brings you straight into the heart of Ramona. So move number two is taking the space around City Hall and making something out of it. Move number three is enhancing the paseo that exists currently as a street that gives access to the parking garage to actually make it a walkable space that is surrounded by development, positive development. So east of the parking garage, there is currently, as we know, a traffic lane that actually gives you access to the garage, etc. We're proposing that it doesn't be close to what it's doing right now because service vehicles have to enter, etc. But through landscaping, through paving, by bringing a new development to its east, it is possible that this space can be made into a positive space where people could actually walk. It almost becomes a mid-block crossing to bring you from Bogard, which is the street immediately south of the parking garage, between the tracks and the parking garage, and Ramona. It becomes a mid-block connection between these two streets. Move number four is Ramona itself. Now, there are a number of important moves along Ramona, starting from the left, going to the right. You can see that there is already a wonderful median in Ramona, which there's a lot of landscape there. We think that this is an asset. There's no reason to take it out. It's very expensive to break curbs. We intend to keep the median and landscape it again, enhance it, make it a very beautiful green feature as you enter it from west and east. We also intend to create a robust streetscape on the sidewalks of Ramona, making it an incredibly beautiful verdant street. We will talk about the traffic implications of Ramona in more detail tomorrow, but our impression, our inclination at this point is to take the 34 feet distance between your median and the existing curb of your sidewalk to the north and the south, put one lane of traffic that's about 11 feet wide, put a bus lane, put a parking lane, and also continue the bike lane that there is by transforming the sidewalk in such a way that your bike lane could possibly not necessarily be where the vehicles are moving, because we feel that's very unsafe to move next to moving vehicles, but actually design a wider sidewalk where the bike lanes and the pedestrians could coexist in one place under beautiful trees. The shaded sort of bike lane, it's much more pleasant anyway, and the asphalted surface is reserved for parking and for moving traffic. We'll get into this in more detail tomorrow. Suffice it to say that between Bogard and Baldwin Avenue, and perhaps even Cesar Chavez, we intend to take each of these intersections and make them landscaped cogent intersections that allow you to cross from one side to the other, that the roadway of Ramona, which seems very wide today and uncrossable, will now seem much more pedestrian friendly, because the medians will be designed in such a way that you cross from one side to the median and then to the other side. So we're trying to bring both sides of the street together to make a pedestrian friendly streetscape. And there are numerous examples in the region that have accomplished this beautifully. So Ramona is an individual project that could be done at a single time, like we did Lancaster, like we have done some of the streets I showed in the afternoon talk. The fifth move in the downtown is actually the parking lot that lies between Main and Bogard, south of Ramona. There is a city-owned parking lot, which you can see rendered here as a long linear, as a long plaza with trees in them. Now, the exact form of this may change between now and tomorrow. We're in the process of studying what this means. But it's a very beautiful, unique gesture, because whether or not we get the train crossing, the paseo that connects you from the middle of the block, from the parking garage to Ramona, now enters into this long park, which Dave Schneider, our landscape architect, will talk about in a minute, or what the vision for that place is. The only thing I want to emphasize is we see it as a place that is distinctly different in its program and use from Morgan Park. So the beauty of this is you have Morgan Park, which is one programmatic open space where one kind of activity happens. You can have another kind of open space along this long plaza. You can have a third kind of open space in front of City Hall. And then there are a few minor open spaces which are equally important in front of many of your existing buildings that we'd like to retain. Note the existing building, the brick building that exists opposite of the parking lot in Morgan Park. So I forget the name of that intersection. Kaiser, if you could help me on that one. But that's okay. If you look at the block to the west of Pacific Avenue, you can see that there is a very small open space in that block. That's okay. That's all right, guys. Just it's okay. Just keep going. You have to go to, there you go. So if you look at the block west of Pacific Avenue, in either corner of the block facing Ramona, there are two open spaces. These open spaces are actually part of the city-owned parking lot right now. What we are simply doing is note that the two buildings in the corners are lighter color, because we feel they are buildings of some significant merit. There's a building to the west that is made of brick. It's a very beautiful brick building, which you will not be able to build today very easily. It's a quality building. And there's another one to the right-hand side, to the east. And we feel keeping those buildings also makes a kind of a unique piece, because you don't have to demolish everything you have in your downtown. You don't have to dissolve everything over time. Some of these buildings could become important markers that talk about history, talk about how this place evolved, etc. So we're acknowledging this by making very small open spaces between them, which could also act as moments of repose, programmed either privately, publicly, and we can study them as this plan evolves. So in terms of pure public improvement strategies, you have the train station plaza, the plaza in front of City Hall, the paseo next to the parking garage, the long linear plaza south of Ramona, the intersections along Ramona, the enhancement of Ramona itself, the entire street network that you can see in green here, and the tiny little dots of open spaces scattered here and there. The last open space that is worthy of mention, which you can see as a small rectangle in the 4-block development between Bogart and Main, north of Ramona, is a little neighborhood park that could either be a private park or a public park. The point we are trying to make there is, with so much potential for development in that piece of land, instead of all space being private, we feel it necessary to have a small public space that can be used as part of a little neighborhood play area. Instead of so much development all focusing on bringing their children, etc., to Morgan Park, there could be a local park where people gather as well. So what you see in this plan is a scattering of open spaces, beginning with a large space, which is Morgan Park, a medium space, which is a long linear park, the lozenge-shaped plaza, and then scattering of open spaces everywhere. And around this scaffold of blocks and streets, you now have all the private development that goes on. And without elaborating on it extraordinarily too much, because I did talk about the various building types in my lecture today afternoon, you can see a variety of building typologies and parking typologies demonstrating how development may occur over time in very different ways. I'll just talk about it very quickly. Note that all the buildings that face Ramona are shown as thick, simple bars that are about 60 feet deep. These could be double loaded bars. These could be like the Mission Meridian brick buildings that I showed you. They could be 3-4 stories tall if you need to be, but they are robust pieces that make a continuous street wall. Note that as the fabric goes to the northern neighborhood and begins to face in those 4 blocks between Bogart and Main, north of Ramona, as the houses go towards the single family fabric to the east and to the north, note that the double loaded buildings go away and we all of a sudden get townhouses, because you don't want 4-story buildings facing single story houses on the other side. So the kind of height division, the kind of massing, the kind of scale, all of which is important, respects the buildings that exist on the other side. When you look at the 2 blocks that are facing Main, because Main is already a street that has commercial use, the buildings again take on more rectangular, robust forms. Note that the parking can be in the form of individual garages, accessed over alleys, sometimes in the form of parking lots, sometimes they could be podiums, there could be various ways of doing it. We're assuming at this stage that none of these buildings have to be parked underground at all. They could all be done in the form of on-grade podiums with buildings on top of them, sometimes just with surface parking lots around it. So as a concluding statement, what I'd like to say is this is a fictional drawing. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it begins to show you quite literally. The reason we like to make this drawing is because if we start drawing bubbles and abstract ideas, I may be saying one thing, but you may be receiving it another way. When you do a drawing like this, at least we come closer to what we are trying to say. And we call this an illustrative plan because it is a hypothetical illustration of what might happen in the extreme long term of your downtown. So we'll obviously get into more details as your questions come up, but I'll turn this on to Dave Schneider, who's going to talk about the details of the open spaces.
Okay, so Vinayak introduced all of the open space network. I think this drawing is basically a diagram showing those areas, and I don't really need to go through that again because he's done an excellent job in explaining all the various different points of the space. So if we could go to the next slide. We started to envision what these different spaces could possibly be. And at the side of Ramona, where we talked about having a linear park or a linear plaza, we started to look at what photographs of other projects, what this space could start to feel like. And as simply as the photograph up on the right, where it becomes a very informal decomposed granite with landscaping. And as you can see in the background there is lots of opportunities for pop-up mom and pop trucks and lunch trucks and various other elements to come in and to fill the areas, especially before development starts to happen. Some of the areas that may already have some restaurants, some areas may not, like I'm thinking of in front of the Verizon building. You might want to be able to take advantage of some of that spaces along there. And then the other photograph starts to look at a more urban area where it's a little bit more linear, a little bit more different in their appearances. Can you go to the next slide? Other opportunities for this area is we could have nighttime lighting that could really attract people from Ramona. Again, we're trying to get people off of Ramona. If that's a major collector street for people passing through, we'd like to be able to get them to see the area and see the happenings and what's going on. Again, the linear park could have built environments such as trellises, or it could use temporary features such as umbrellas and others. And if we go to the next slide. And maybe at the corners of Main and Ramona, we might introduce simple little waterworks elements that basically announce the gateway. These also become elements along the sequence of the walkways that get people to move through the area. So these might be strategically located along the paths from the train station to this area, or even as we move farther north. Next slide. And as we move through the Paseo, what does that start to look like? And we might have interesting lighting, as well as using shade trellises to create shadow patterns, and also be able to have pop-up buildings, some things that are just simple use of containers to build up within the parking lots in a short period of time. But this is basically to try to get those people that are on the commuter trains to see a festive space, be able to start to come across and move through the Paseo and find their way to Ramona and through the other wonderful neighborhood areas. Next slide. And how else can we start to do this? We have some big canvases, such as the ARC building and also the parking garage. We can use murals or light shows that can be done on maybe the ARC building or even the parking garage itself to, again, captivate people that are coming through on the commuter train systems and people coming up Pacific and other streets to be able to start to see that. And also on the Paseo, we would like to have open spaces for people to be able to have outdoor events going on that could be readily seen from either Ramona or from the train station to, again, get people invited in through the neighborhoods. Next slide. So then we also have other paseos that we have to look at. These are different. These are paseos that might happen along the north side of Ramona over by Morgan Park. And how do we start to introduce that park-like feeling, again, bringing people down to Ramona from this space, or if you're on the other side of Ramona on the southern side, entice them to walk up and go through up into Morgan Park. So these are various different options that we can start to look at, but shade and coverage is important to us. And then we have the train station itself. So the train station could be the plaza. The upper right photograph there represents what an on-grade crossing would like to be, if that's possible. As Tim has mentioned, we'd like to make it a mobility hub, so we would have lots of different forms of travel from the train station for people to be able to get out and move through the neighborhoods and move to the north. And then the two photographs at the bottom represent what a possible train station could start to represent. And then we move to our small parks. We have our neighborhood parks to the north, and then we have our community, our civic center, not our community, but our civic center park on the south side. And what would those elements start to be? On the small parks to the north, we might have play areas and naturalized landscapes for people to be able to use and go through. And in front of the Civic Center Park, obviously, we'd want to have things that would allow people to rest along their walks, but also get them to come through. There might be a speaker's corner or something of that nature in front of the City Hall that might be pertinent to those functions. Next slide. And then how do we start to make our streets into the walkable communities that and biking communities using all the forms of transportation? So here we have photographs showing the current use of having bicycle paths on the sidewalks adjacent to parked cars, and lovely trees that are separate those bicycle paths along that edge and gives you a transition to the pedestrian edge, so you don't have traffic issues with pedestrians and bicyclists. And you also have the nice protected cars that give you a protection from the street, from the faster moving vehicles. And also we've introduced trees between the parking places that actually start to narrow the street, but also offer shade to all those who are using the bicycle and pedestrian paths. Next slide. So then we also have interim uses for existing parking lots. We've established a long-term vision, but as we know, a lot of these areas are overparked. So what could we start to do to basically plant the seeds for future development? And a lot of it is done simply by paint or temporary structures that can be easily moved and taken out. And these are just event places that we can use that are being underutilized. Next slide. So then we have these small open network places, these little pocket parks that start, and pocket plazas that start to happen near the edges that Vinayak was mentioning. And what are these spaces and what could they start to feel like? And these are a few slides that they can go from fairly heavily used areas that might happen near the corners of the plazas between Main and Ramona, and maybe Sterling and Ramona. Or we could have quiet seating areas that might happen closer to where the new Starbucks is going, and those type of elements. So those, we have a variety of spaces, and they're very much opportunities to be used. Next slide. So we started to look at Ramona and what would Ramona start to be based on a street tree pattern. And basically this shows that we could actually put in our walkway, our not walkway, but our bicycle path along the particular edge of Ramona. As Vinayak has mentioned, we're not changing any of the curb lines along that edge. So what we have done is added 8 foot of parking along the outer edges of Ramona, and just within that curb line to the curb line roughly of the existing parking lots would become an elevated in the fact that it's 6 inches higher than the street bicycle path along that particular edge. And that's how they would start to move through the bicycles along this side. And if we can go to the next slide. This is kind of a section of what that condition might be. So we would have the 2 travel lanes and all the way across the 39 feet or 34 feet that's the existing width from the median to the edge. And then we would add another 8 foot along for a bike trail along that edge. And then the parking lots would exist. And then we go to the next slide. This is where it might start to be when new developments come. You would still keep the bike lane. The bike lane would be in place. You would add a second row of trees as new development would come in, and you would add the new landscaping. And also what you would be adding in that additional space is a walkway easement for that that development. And if we can go to the next slide, this is a section of what that would start to look like. That 12 feet of space plus the 3'6" could become part of an easement from those property owners to create the pedestrian space and the space along the edges for retail or mixed use events. And even on the north side of the street, if you chose to do so, arcades could be employed and allow the development to, and the second floors to be able to come out and come over that space. So there are opportunities for that to happen. I don't think you'd want to do that on the south side because then it would be on the north side of the building in too much shade. But I think along the northern edge where you get the southern suns in the winter times, that would work out just fine for an arcade system if you chose to do that. Allow the developers to move across the easement in the second and third stories above. Next slide. And then you get into how we start to cross these streets and what these streets start to feel like. In the top middle photo along those edges, you can use paving patterns to define where is walking surfaces, where are car surfaces, and where are bicycle services locations at. By just changing the paving patterns through there, that gives you another clue. So does the photograph down at the bottom left. Also, this shows where you actually have corners of an intersection that are relatively flush. So people can move right across and it's really easy and really comfortable, especially for cyclists as well as pedestrians to move through. And then the photographs to the right are just simple, inexpensive solutions to crosswalks that you can enhance them simply by paint. So these are things that could be instigated quite quickly and quite early. Some quick moves to be made where it would not cost a lot of money initially. And then as time comes on, you could start to make your changes into a more permanent solution. Next slide. So that takes us to the street network and to the street tree system. And for us, street trees are very important in the fact of not so much the species, but the overall form of the tree. And the form of the tree is very important in telling stories. At the two ends of Ramona, either in the east and the west, you'll see kind of a darker blue represented there. Those become our gateway areas. And so we would think a form of a tree in those particular gateway areas to be different than the magenta space, which would be in the center of the downtown. This would allow people moving through on Ramona to let them know that they're entering a different area. And what would that form of a tree be? It could be a pyramidal form. It could be a palm tree form, similar to, let's say, Catella in the resort area of Disneyland, where they used a very strong presence of palm trees through there. And you know you're in a space that's special when you're coming through those type of areas. So that would be a gateway type of arrangement. Then along Ramona in the magenta, you probably want to have a tree that's more vase-shaped. Those are trees that tend to be fairly vertical, provide good shade because they're in a V form, and I will show you the forms in the next slide. But that starts to give you the shade, but also allows people to see signage and various other elements if there happens to be mixed use along those particular edges. So those are the basic and formulas for forms. The red area along the transit center, we would like that to be some form of a skyline tall aerial palm, which basically ends up being aerial signage that could be seen from long distances and allow people to know from the north and south and even east and west that this is starting the beginnings of the downtown. And it kind of lines the edge of where the downtown starts and starts to move farther north. A lot of the lavender and various other areas within this, we would like those to be your typical oval form or umbrella form trees. In the north-south streets, we generally use evergreen trees because in the summer times and even in the winter, that blocks the harsh western suns. And then usually in the east-west directions, they tend to be more deciduous trees to allow the suns in the winter in to help heat homes during the winter months. So we can go to the next slide. And these are some of the forms of the trees that I was discussing. So you have your vase-shaped form, which is the first one, which you see that goes up and it really creates a lot of open space through for signages. You have a flowering trees that might be used more in the residential neighborhoods that offer ephemeral qualities to a street. And it goes into a bloom, it changes the character of a street. In fact, sometimes it's used in certain areas to become the festival of the jacaranda tree or the festival of the other kind of tree that becomes during that particular time a bloom time. Then we have the skyline tree that could be used along the train station, which is your taller Washingtonias, which can get up to 60 to 80, maybe even 100 feet. That can be seen from quite long distances to demarcate the areas. And then you have your other possible palm form or pyramidal forms that might be used at the entrances that signify you are coming into the downtown area of Baldwin Park. And then the two lower left pictures are more umbrella and oval form trees that could be used also in residential areas to help to provide shade for your neighborhoods and for people walking through the pedestrian areas. And that's the extent of our presentation tonight.
Okay, thank you, David. I want to quickly move the discussion to implementation. This is a specific plan, and the specific plan includes, besides a vision, which we have talked about thus far, it also includes policy framework for the council and staff to make daily decisions, but then also includes a code, a development code, which is incredibly important tool to implement the vision. Because as you look at some of what has been presented, it is not likely that the city is gonna do this all by themselves. They don't have a bottomless pool of resources. In most cases, they're gonna, even for public infrastructure, they're gonna be looking at private investment to partner with them. Having a good, clear, precise code and that builds off and is based on a compelling vision is an incredible tool to offer. Most of our plans and most of our vision, we want the picture to the left, right? We want it walkable, we want it transit friendly, we want it multimodal, we want buildings to line up the street, parking in the back, all of those things that we desire and that we've talked about for the last hour. But somehow we keep getting the stuff on the right. So what gives? Why the disconnect? And one of the things we're now learning is disconnect happens in the zoning code. The zoning code produces, the zoning code that we have in most of our cities produces very unpredictable results. What do I mean by that? It's based on FAR, which is a mathematical calculation. So for example, if you have an FAR of 1, you can extrude your building based on your land area, you can extrude it 1 story. But what if I told you that that same FAR, you can extrude your building 8 story by just building over 1/8 of a lot? So your form that you get from the FAR form of regulation is very unpredictable. Another good example is a setback. A very innocuous standard minimum setback of 15 feet. If that setback were to be complied with, you can place the building at 15 feet, you can place it 150 feet and still be okay. because it's a minimum setback. It does not precisely tell you where to place the building. So the form of the development is very unpredictable, and the regulations that you have are not conducive to produce and to deliver the vision. So what we are, and I'm going to plan the idea, and we're going to come back with a lot more specifics tomorrow. But I want to plan the idea of another way of looking at development regulations, and that is to code the areas that are important. The areas that are important that we have talked about at great length are the public realm. We've talked about the streets. We've talked about the open spaces. Now, if you open your existing codes and look at them, zoning codes, and this is not just Baldwin Park, it's the majority of American cities, there is very little mention, if at all any, on the design of the public realm, on the regulations that affect the public realm, which are the streets and the open spaces. So what we are concerned about, and what the public engages is this entire public realm. And really, in the private realm, what we are looking at is the frontages that define that public realm on either side, how it meets the street, the sidewalk, the trees, the streetscape improvement, and all of the things that David and Vinayak talked about. It's less important what's inside the building, whether it's residential, office, commercial. The frontages will vary. But the land uses are less important. The regulating mechanism here is the public realm, not so much land uses. Now, you might come and say, well, why don't we use design guidelines as opposed to standards, and just take that that FAR that I suggested. And if an FAR of 1, you can extrude the building 1 story tall, or if you have FAR of 3 in this case, you can extrude that building 3 story tall. And if you have a lot that is block wide, 500 feet block, you can extrude the building 500 feet. And then you have design guidelines and you try to articulate that building mass. But you're still dealing with primarily a cookie cutter building. The type of development that Vinayak talked about, that we get with most of the development patterns that we see in our cities when urban apartments are delivered. But what we're trying to get at is a bottom, which is a context-based, different context. So if you're, for example, on a primary street, you may have different building types. They could be courtyard buildings, they could be mixed-use buildings, work-live units. But if you are on a different street, say a boulevard that is mixed boulevard, then those building types might be completely different. And then if you're on a residential street, I mean, remember the Mission Meridian project that Vinayak talked about. This is a great example. So you break the box. You break the box with building types, and those building types are based on the context of the street, the context of the open space, the context of what exists within the area. So that's what we are interested in doing with this code. We're also interested in looking at open spaces and a continuum of open spaces, both that start in the public realm, but go into the private realm as well. So we talked about continuous greenway or a linear park. A community park already exists in the downtown area. We're talking about creating new plazas, new squares, neighborhood parks, opportunities for community gardens and pocket parks, and then extending beyond the neighborhood and the block, and then continuing the open spaces. Particularly relevant in this pandemic and the post-pandemic world is how do you provide open spaces on the lot and within the building, whether it's in a patio or a roof garden, or providing a courtyard, terrace, or a yard. These are private open spaces, but providing that continuum is important, and we're going to code that. Streets are incredibly important. We've started discussing them. We're going to discuss street sections tomorrow in further detail, but we're talking not just about volume of traffic and speed, but we're also talking the ability of street to create places, to be multimodal, to be context sensitive, and to support adjacent land uses, and more importantly, based on a community vision. And different streets have different purposes. They could be either placemaking, or they could be geared towards mobility. There's certain streets that the primary function may be to move traffic. and less important is the place, but there are other streets like the ones that you have in the downtown area where place is incredibly important and should not be forgotten. So the standards will look at that. And then frontages. Frontages are how the building comes and meets the street so that you avoid having dead facades or frontages that are inappropriate for the land uses that are provided within the building. So I want to, again, we will come back and we'll have a much more robust discussion on the code. We'll have a regulating plan. We'll talk about the zones and the different urban standards. But the concept I wanted to present today, and we will at this point take a pause and begin answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Kaiser. Looks like we have one comment that came in with respect to Ramona. Just for clarification, is the plan recommending that Ramona continue to be 2 lanes on each side?
Yeah, I can take a stab at answering that one first. So our recommendation at this point is to maintain 2 lanes in each direction. Partially, this is due to consistency on Ramona to both the east and the west of the area. And 2, we feel that with the additional development that could occur in the area, we would probably need to maintain that level of mobility for vehicles.
Thank you, Tim. We got another question coming in. It says, is there an optional street width to integrate landscape features in the medians or landscape buffer between bike lanes and vehicles? For example, Main Avenue going to Pacific Avenue is now a one-way lane street. Are these streets eligible to have both a pedestrian and vehicular realm? This area specifically is where the city attracts more foot traffic through community events.
Tim, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure, I can start, but looking for other input as well.
Sure.
So yeah, there's a couple different factors at play when we're looking at the width of streets. So one is, for as much as we can, we don't want to expand past the current curb to curb width, because then it becomes very expensive to have to redo sidewalks, et cetera. With the exception of locations where there's new buildings and proposed for the entire block, in which case you can actually set the entire street back and reimagine things like we talked about a little bit earlier. So, if you're maintaining things within the current curb to curb width, so let's say on Pacific or Main, then it's like, well, what can you do within that space that's most effective and most efficient for moving people, including bikes and cars? So there are recommended lane widths for bike lanes. If you have just a single striped bike lane that's on a lower volume street, you could do a 4-foot lane. Oftentimes, though, that includes the gutter, which isn't the most pleasant place to ride. So we like to recommend at least 5 feet for just a regular striped bike lane. If you're going into something wider, let's say a buffered bike lane, usually it's a 5-foot lane plus a 2 or 3 foot buffer next to it. And then that can also depend if you're being next to parking, because you want to make sure there's a buffer or a wide enough lane that bicyclists are not affected by car doors opening and closing. So there's a lot of different factors to go into it, but we'd recommend a minimum of 5 feet for just a regular lane, maybe 8 feet for a buffered lane. And then if you wanted to go something more intense for bicyclists, so protected lanes, sometimes they're 8 to 12 feet wide.
And then from the landscape standpoint, along buffers along the edge, many times if there's car parking, we try to locate tree edges between the parked cars to give us another area of trees. That does a couple of things for us. And when it gets the trees sometimes on tight sidewalks away from the buildings, but it also starts to narrow the street and starts to make the street feel perceptionally narrower than it currently is. And it tends to slow traffic because of that. You get that kind of tunnel effect that goes on. And also that allows us to offer greenery that isn't right up adjacent to areas, especially if there's parking. People are going to want to be getting in and out of their cars and going to storefronts or in residential neighborhoods, there may be an actual landscape parkway in addition to street parking that starts to give that further separation.
Thank you, David. Looks like we got a couple more comments, a series of comments from Steve, and we can tackle them one at a time. A unique challenge and opportunity is the intersection of Ramona and Downing. This forms the east portal to downtown area, transitioning from the industrial zone. It also has a diagonal street, including train tracks that transect the regular grid. This presents both an opportunity and a challenge. On the one hand, the corners of the intersection can provide for interesting building mass. For a hypothetical example, a sweeping curved facade along the northwest corner, or a dramatic acute angled edge on the northwest corner.
Vinayak, can you?
Yes, we agree, Steve. I mean, the drawing here is, not doing a great job in showing it, but that's what it's trying to show. It's trying to make, it's like a beautiful flat iron corner, basically. It's a complex intersection in two ways. One is, it straddles the tracks on the north side, but it also continues down on the south side, and there's a little bit of an art piece there that we are trying to preserve in the green. So the little green parklet that you see here, park, I should say, or green, is just a respectful gesture to not wipe that important landmark of your city away, which will also slow down traffic. But I think it's a great point. We agree, and that's a very astute observation, because we feel that as traffic comes from Ramona due east into the downtown, that building could really be something, both in terms of its use and form, something very special and quirky in a good way. You want buildings that are unique in unique destination sites, and that is certainly one of them. This is a very important point also from a coding standpoint, because one of the things we do in coding is we identify important places where buildings need to have accents of sorts. We call them out. For example, there could be a portion of a regulation that says, these are 5 spots in your downtown that are either important terminuses or important accents. And what that means is the design cannot be generic. It has to have something that marks that important place. So we completely agree with you. We'll probably, show you some examples of this tomorrow. But I would argue that what your point suggests so brilliantly is both on the east side and also on the west side, probably, I don't know if it is Baldwin Avenue or Cesar Chavez or which one, if I'm getting the street names correct. But they're basically gateways into your downtown, like you said. And how to mark those gateways is a very important point. In Lancaster, when Dave and I worked, we proposed 2 large sort of civic lanterns to mark the gateway into the downtown. The budget didn't allow it. It's still not built. But the point is that whether it's in the form of buildings or whether it's in the form of freestanding objects, you do want to emphasize these important gateways. Your point is extremely well taken, and we will show some examples of that tomorrow.
Let me just add to that discussion, because I think that corner that you, Steve, accurately point out, but in addition to that, also the corner that you see across from City Hall currently lacks spatial definition. So when you're driving around, you don't have any landmark building that actually gives you visual cues on where the streets are and where I can turn, because it's all either parking or unbuilt, or the buildings are set back. So having the buildings define that intersection, that acute intersection, actually makes traffic flow safely, because now you know where the street is turning, because you have a visual reference in a building's form of where the streets are turning and where the streets are moving around.
And one other thing we'll need to consider too, and part of the question had to do with the massive concrete that's out there, is some of the requirements from a traffic engineering standpoint. So right now the intersection is really big with very generous turning radii. So there's big paths for vehicles to make the moves across the intersection. So those can potentially be tightened up a little bit, which would provide more space for pedestrians, as Kaiser mentioned, to give more definition to where the vehicles are going. However, we do need to take into account the current train control gates that are at that intersection. So there are restrictions to where the vehicles can go, where they're required to stop to provide that safe clearance for the Metrolink trains. So those are going to have to be incorporated in one way or another into the designs of the corners to make sure that we're adhering to those standards for train safety.
Thank you, Tim. It looks like it answered the other 2 points that he had made in the question. And Steve, again, if you can, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to ask follow-up questions. Still waiting for, haven't received any questions or comments.
You have a raised hand.
Oh, there it is. Chris, go ahead.
Hey, Ron, how are you doing?
Hi, Commissioner Garrido.
Good. Hey, I had a quick question. I've been in and out. I've had to deal with school also at the same time, in economics class. But my question was the area where the old historical, you know, that building right there. So when you come around right by City Hall and, you know, coming up Main right there, that where the old historical building, now it's all shut down right there, that all that parking and all that, we have, what do we have planned for that area there? Because I mean, it's just all pretty much, you know, that little building and then all a bunch of parking over in that area right there.
Ron, can you?
So is that on the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kaiser.
I was just going to say, can you address the ENA that you have with Roll?
Oh, yes.
Parcel?
So what we like to give it the term, the lot, essentially the parking lot that's behind those buildings, and just as a reference point, behind the King Taco, correct, Commissioner?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
So,
that whole, you know, where that bend makes that turn right there. And
yes.
you know, that area and that, yeah, all that vicinity, there's just tons and tons of parking, which is fine. I mean, to a certain extent, right? I mean, obviously you have businesses with that have like King Taco, you can enter from the back, but my thing is just what, you know, and then we also have that empty building, or, you know, I don't know what its use is, but like what, you know, that's, I guess, somewhere else that might, you know, could use some definite attention.
No, good point. So that area, it's kind of interesting if you really look at it from an aerial view. It's been referred to as the bow tie lot. But the city does own that. There is an exclusive negotiating agreement with Rome, who developed the Rome project that's adjacent to City Hall, the mixed-use project. So that's a phase 3, and that'll be coming to the city in the near future. So there is a development in the pipeline there.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, you know, because I got my Google Maps open and I'm just going through and cutting through areas, you know, from, you know, this another visual just to be able to see exactly, you know, kind of panning back and forth.
And what we also anticipate too, I think as we complete this downtown specific plan, I think that by the time they come in, I think we'll be able to address a lot of the enhancements, a lot of the concepts and ideas and coding that have been discussed today and be implemented for that project. Another site too that is potential is the corner on the east side of Main, which is directly adjacent to essentially where the Urban X is located. If you're familiar with that area, that is a phase 2. So in the future, there's potential for development in that area as well.
I got it. Thank you.
looks like we haven't got any more comments. Again, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and unmute you. Looks like we got another comment. Says, will the specific plan address any street improvements at intersections? For example, Old Town Pasadena has crosswalks that allows pedestrians to walk directly across the middle of the road. The city can integrate some public art at some intersection. This is a good point there.
So let me start answering the first part of this. So what the commenter is referring to is what we'll say is a pedestrian scramble. So it's allowing pedestrians to cross all directions of the intersection, typically at one time. And these are great at locations where you have a lot of people trying to cross diagonally. So instead of having to, let's say, go north-south and then east-west, they're able just to make the movement at one time. So what we would want to do, I believe, and Kaiser, correct me if I'm wrong, is to not to say that they have to be in place in these locations, because it would require some additional traffic engineering and looking at pedestrian volumes and signal timing and make sure you're not affecting bus flow and those type of things. But I think we would want to encourage the implementation of them as possible, and also incorporate some of the decorative treatments as part of the intersection designs as well, as you see in Vinayak's plan here. Include those special visuals, the painted sidewalks, the different colors, to make it be more obvious as a place where people are moving. So Kaiser, can you just confirm though how we would encourage these, but not necessarily require them, because we don't know yet if they would work from an engineering standpoint?
I think that's well said. That's precisely how we would proceed.
No comments received yet. Kaiser, I just wanted to make a couple points. I think what's being presented here tonight, I think it's the map, essentially, as Vinayak had mentioned, it's providing that grain that doesn't exist within downtown Baldwin Park, and creating that pedestrian-friendly environment with shaded trees and activating that public realm where it creates an interesting pedestrian experience, which is lacking within the downtown. And I think the idea of making that cross from exiting the Metrolink and getting those people to safely walk across the track and essentially spill out into Ramona is a great opportunity there. The other is Morgan Park. I know we talked about this early on. Is Morgan Park, the community center there, is highly utilized. There was a slide showing that the parking is highly used that's adjacent to Morgan Park. And it's a great opportunity with this plan by greening and providing that grain for that pedestrian experience, where you get those people, instead of getting them when they leave the community center, getting in their cars and going back home, but essentially taking advantage of what's being offered in the downtown by creating that safe and interesting pedestrian experience, where they may say, hey, I'm going to hang out, I'm done at the community center, and go visit a restaurant, a cafe, or go to the gym. But I think this is a great representation of what can be within downtown Baldwin Park.
Ron, I will just say one thing to extend your point. It goes without saying that having an on-grade crossing has a number of distinct advantages. Now, we may not get it, that's okay. I mean, we can, this is a strategy that shows the worst case scenario. But I just want you to understand that, there are so many downtowns that at least our team has worked on where the station is located as if the downtown didn't exist. In other words, you land on the other side of downtown. So I just want to say this emphatically because if there's any way for us to talk to the authorities and figure out a way where you can land north of the tracks, not south of the tracks, towards the downtown, I think it's a game changer. So I just want to bring it up. I mean, we can live with it. You can see this is a beautiful thing. You can walk on the streets and all that. But getting down, walking straight through a paseo, and within 30 seconds or 20 seconds to be in the heart of your downtown is a step ahead of. It's a wonderful thing. So to the degree that we can achieve that, it's good. City making is always about compromises, and we do the best we can. But it's important to put this point on the table.
Yeah. No, good point, Vinayak. It's just interesting as I was coming into the office this morning, and ever since our first Charrette yesterday, and driving down Downing, there's so many obstructions. It's essentially just it's loud. It's telling you get in your car, and then drive to wherever you're going. You have the fence there, so there's really this lack of continuity to allow pedestrians to cross. And there was one example you gave in the presentation where the pedestrian gives you that sense of security where Tim, you had mentioned earlier on, by providing Wi-Fi spots or bike stations, decorative bollards, enhanced landscaping. That all contributes to that activated pedestrian environment.
And might I add to that, Ron, that activation goes a long way. That vibrancy of a downtown. There was a question in regards to homelessness and parks in these new urban parks. That activation, that vibrancy, a lot of people, a lot of eyes on the street start to keep the homeless situation in check.
No, good point, David.
I think I have one more question, Ron.
Where are we?
Oh, no, we addressed it. Sorry. I don't want to pick on the participants that haven't spoken, but people who haven't spoken, if you raise your hand, we would love to hear from you what you think about the direction we're headed in.
I had one more thing to add, Ron.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Commissioner Greedo. Thank you.
So, worst case scenario, if we weren't able to get that, the pedestrian drop off for the train set on the other side there, I mean, what then? What would be the next? What would be the next phase then to do? You know what I'm saying? Because that is kind of a key thing that you mentioned, right? That they're coming off the other side, it's just nothing but fence, parking, and that's pretty much it, right? But rather, where we want them to entice them to to funnel or to try to get them to come across and utilize whatever businesses or things that are going on within our city. What would be the next phase for that if, let's say, we couldn't do that?
Vinay, can you take a stab at that?
Yes, I can, Commissioner. That's an excellent question. We had a lot of discussion about this. This is where we started this project. I mean, the first, obviously goes without saying, the raison of this project begins to be, the station, or so it seems. And then you begin to realize, Tim Ernie brought it to our notice immediately. This is a metro link. This is not a gold line, which is a huge difference. I mean, this is not it is a train nonetheless. There's no question about it, but it's not a train. It's not a light rail. It's a different kind of an entity. So one way to think about it is, if you get the crossing, the station moves to the north side, goes without saying that people getting down now have a direct relationship to the downtown. If you don't get it, which is the way we've shown it, all it simply means is that the presence of the train, to be more specific, the presence of the metro link now, is not the sort of Rosetta Stone of the entire plan. It's there. It's an important multimodal gesture that brings people here. And what that means from a design standpoint is you have to really invest in terms of signage, in terms of streetscape, in terms of public realm, that the walkability quotient from the station, the plaza, the street, the activation on both sides of Ramona is really first class. As long as you do that, there are plenty of examples across the country where you don't get down directly into the downtown, but the walk into your downtown is so fantastic that you don't feel anything getting into the downtown. So it's not the end of the world if you don't get it, but it's important to put it out there that, you know, it would certainly help in terms of bringing people directly into your downtown.
Yeah, and just to expand a little bit too. So right now there's 3 locations where you can cross the Metrolink tracks to get from the station to the rest of downtown. So there's the pedestrian bridge that connects to the northeastern corner of, or southeastern corner of the parking garage. You can cross at grade near the intersection of Bogart and Ramona. And you can cross at grade at the intersection of Bogart and Pacific. So what we'd want to do is, if riders are required to stay on the south side of the tracks, is really look for ways to improve that connectivity between the station and Bogart and Pacific. So as an example, to connect down to Pacific right now, there's a really narrow, about 3-foot wide sidewalk that cars basically park up right against. So there's the potential of removing the first row of parallel parking spaces to make it a nice wider sidewalk. You can easily get about a 12-foot wide sidewalk. You can put some trees in there, improve that connection to Pacific, and improve the connection along Pacific all the way up to Ramona. That could not replace an at-grade easy connection right outside of City Hall, but could help ameliorate that and still provide a nice welcoming environment to get people from the train into the heart of the downtown area.
And you know, I would just add, it's not a one or the other. I think you can do all of them. You should certainly pursue enhancing the Pacific experience, the Bogart experience, and then if you get the grade crossing, that's just the icing on the cake. That would be great.
Looks like we did get one comment, but it looks like it was answered in our previous discussion, that it's not just one solution. There's a number of opportunities to get pedestrians to the north side of the train tracks.
Yeah, and just to expand on that too, Ron. So I think this is Melissa's comment is, right now, if you do use that staircase that I mentioned on the side of the bridge, it drops you down pretty much into nowhere, right? It's a kind of a amorphous street, and you don't really know where it is, or there's vehicles going. So one of the great things about this plan is there is that proposal to do the Paseo from the parking garage to get you back up to Ramona, and that's being shown as yellow next to the parking garage. So by providing a nice landing space for people, it will definitely help encourage and welcome people into and to move up into the downtown area instead of the current situation.
No, good point, Tim. You know, I was just looking on Google Street View, looking at just from the pedestrian level, if someone's, you know, coming in on the train and looking at, you know, your first look is if you're going east, you can see there's a lot of concrete. It's not softened by or enticing for the pedestrian to want to walk down Bogart. But a good point there. Looks like we have Commissioner Edwin Borges. Thank you again for joining us. Feel free to give your comments or questions.
Can you hear me, Ron?
Yes.
You know, I think another nice detail to attract and entice people around that area, you know, we're focused and talking about the train station drop off and all that, and Paseo and City Hall, would be to have like on some of these adjacent buildings, have a rooftop event or activity big screens, you know, where people are, you know, a little cocktail happy hour, where people see the activity and commotion. You know, I like what I saw earlier with murals and lights, and you know, we can really do a lot in that whole surrounding area to just really spruce up and have people wondering, wow, you know, why don't we you know, stop off here and grab a drink or a bite or watch the end of the game. That's my 2 cents. Thanks.
No, good point. Thank you, Commissioner Borges. You know, one interesting, one thing that reminds me, Kaiser, early on in the, we had the downtown walk, is you gain a different perspective when you're on the rooftop of that parking structure. And you can see the hustle and bustle of downtown Baldwin Park from above. But great comment, Commissioner.
And I might add, the views to the mountains are just spectacular.
Yes. One question came in with Commissioner Borges bringing up that point. Will there be could there be a potential for rooftop development standards for within the code in proposing those rooftop activities, or it could be a private open space, private common area of a development, kind of similar to what Vinayak presented earlier this afternoon?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that, you know, we want to encourage a continuum of open spaces that start at the public realm, but then permeate into the lot in the building itself. And one of the open spaces that a developer could provide that is private for its residents could be on the rooftop. So certainly that's an option. Now, to the extent that you want to require it, that's really up to the city in how far it wants to go with the regulations. Our preference would be to encourage it and to require the open space be provided within the building. How it's provided, whether it's provided in a balcony or in a roof or in a courtyard, that flexibility is given to the developer, individual developer.
There is a practical issue to add to this. You know, when we do type 5 buildings, which are stick buildings, which are the most mainstream buildings we will design, to provide rooftop access is a very precarious thing because of leakage issues. So most developers are actually averse, for liability reasons, to, you know, provide rooftop access amply. They may do it on a strategic basis here and there, but to actually mandate it is not a very good idea. To encourage it is not a bad idea at all.
Yes. All right, looks like we haven't got any comments yet. I know we're getting close to 8 o'clock, but if you have any further questions or comments, please submit them now. Forever hold your peace.
Well, I think I would like to encourage something between now and tomorrow. I think, you know, there's a lot to digest here, obviously. I think what we would love to hear from you is, as you think about this overnight, tomorrow, any moment. Tomorrow is the last day of the workshop, but it's certainly not it's the beginning of the project. It's not the end by a long shot. If you have any comments, just email them to us during the entire day so that we can at least address it in some form or the other by tomorrow evening. But what we'd love to do is simply, I mean, this is, you know, a pretty rigorously vetted out plan through series of discussions, but by a long shot, we're not at all saying we got everything right or wrong. If there are things you want to see, if there are things you like, if there are things that we missed, please let us know till the very last minute and we will address them to whatever degree we can, but we should address it. That's the most important.
Ron will make this presentation available both in YouTube as well as PDF so people can download it and take a closer look at it. I know we kind of walked through the slides, but as Vinayak said, go through them this evening, early tomorrow, and let us know if you have any feedback.
Will do. Thank you, Kaiser and Vinayak and Tim and David. If we don't have any more questions, thank you again for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow on our final day. Again, encourage you to submit your questions. Please feel free to send them to me, rgarcia@baldwinpark.com, and we'll share them with staff and the consultant team. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.